Hey guys, it's Stacie Hays from Career Services here with the advanced resume writing session. So this session is meant for students who already have a resume draft, who really just want to elevate it. They want to make their resume competitive with other people's. It's giving you a couple ideas and tips and tricks on how you can kind of elevate that document. So very first thing that I would recommend that you do is you get a hold of a resume rubric. So right here I have a link that would take you to one. You also can do Google searches and find them, but essentially a resume rubric is a chart that indicates to you where in the scheme of things your resume would lie. So for example, most of them, to get full points, your resume is 1 page. So then if your resume is two pages, you maybe get 1 less point. So it kind of helps you indicate where your strengths are as well as where your weaknesses are. And it helps you set up a plan for follow-up. So in some cases, that's really easy to do. Like page length is a really good example. You can easily reduce your resume to 1 page. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult, like maybe you don't have an appropriate amount of experience or something like that. In those cases, that's where you start to plan for the future. What can you do to help build your skills to be sure that you are going to be able to be successful? So one of the best and first ways to elevate your resume is through action words. So action words are words that sound like you're doing something. So they sound very active in nature. And here again is a link that takes you to a website that has a ton of action words that you can take a look at. There are some action words that are still considered action words that are what we would call passive. Passive just sounds like not very involved, not active, those kinds of things. Things like did or helped or assisted. Those are all really passive, active action verbs. We're looking for very active action words, words that sound like you actually did something, like implemented or managed or facilitated or implemented. Those are all really good action words that you can use. It's also really important that you make sure that you vary your action words. So anytime that you start to repeat yourself on a resume, it really causes the employer to scan a lot faster. So we want to make sure that we're varying those action words. And if you are repeating an action word, like maybe 2 times, it's not in the same part of the resume. So again, that's an area where you could go through, kind of identify where those action verbs are. There should always be an action verb that starts with each bullet. So each statement that you are showing to an employer should have a bullet on it, and each of those bullets should start with an action word. A couple resume tips before we get started. It's important that you back up your skills claims. If you say you've done something, you have to be able to prove that. So some students will say something like strong leadership experience or strong leadership skills, but there's never any indication on their resume that they've ever done anything like that. So it's important that if you're saying that you have good time management or you have a strong work ethic or something like that, that the resume really supports what you're saying there. We want you to keep the resume consistent in format. We want the employer to easily be able to find everything that they need to find really quickly. So we want everything to kind of be very consistent. For the most part, we're going to keep design elements and color to a minimum. So unless you're a graphic designer or an art major, we're going to stay away from graphics and colors. Also probably would recommend that you stay away from formatted templates that you can get online. So there's a lot of choices for those these days. Even in Canva, you can find a lot of options. But unless you're looking at a really creative career where you would use some of those graphic tendencies, we kind of want you to stay away from that. If you do have a graphic tendency, we wouldn't want you to be using a canned template. We would want you to be incorporating your own kind of design elements into that document. It is important to maintain an active voice throughout the resume. So interesting words are interesting. So that's using those action verbs. And it's also keeping accurate tense. So it's important that in present tense, you're talking about your current experiences, and past tense for things that you've completed. And this is important because this also contributes to accuracy of the document. So if an employer sees that you're talking about a past employment opportunity in the present tense, that kind of indicates that you just didn't go back and update it. So it can kind of make you look a little bit bad. And then finally, all dates should be in reverse chronological order, which means your most important information, your most recent information, is going to be first. So your current positions are going to be first, followed by things that come after that. And this is important because if you would list the first job that you've ever had, which is something that a lot of students do, An employer, when they're scanning that, is going to think that that was your most recent job, so that you would have a big gap. Now, you can get away from this a little bit in the sense of those dates start over with every heading. So, for example, if you did an internship last semester, but currently you have a job and that job's not related to your field of study, since those two jobs are in different headings, you can still list them in chronological order under those headings. So that's a way to kind of get your related employment out there first. A couple more tips. One of the most important things is measurable goals and accomplishments. So thinking about to yourself, have you met goals in the past? Have you been given additional responsibilities? Like, are you able to do things at work that other people are not able or not asked to do? Have you at all contributed to employers meeting their goals? So this could be even from the subset of, like, you work at a retail store. Does that retail store meet their sales goals? How do they stand in their district? You know, things like that. Anytime an employer can see a number on a resume, they get really excited. So thinking about how you can incorporate some of those numbers, percentages, or showing that you've been able to accomplish goals is going to be very important for an employer. That being said, we also don't really want to reinvent the wheel. So if you're describing an experience that is not necessarily that for a job that's like it's really universally known, like let's say a cashier. Everybody knows that cashiers operate the cash register. So that's not something that we have to reiterate to an employer. What we would want to focus on in that respect is, what are some of the other things that you have learned to do as a cashier that you have found to be helpful towards your professional experience, or like honing your professional skills. We want to keep the resume short and simple. Really should be limited to 1 page. If you're doing graduate school, you might be able to expand that out to 2 pages. Flashy doesn't mean better, so we don't want to take attention away from your skills, experience, and abilities. This is where a student might come up with an inflated job title, or they might say that they do things at work that make them sound more important. An employer generally is pretty good at fleshing out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So like if you're a garbage man, but you're saying that you're a receptacle recycling technician or something like that, or even with Subway always calling their servers sandwich artists, all those kinds of things. Want to make sure that we're just being really clear about what your skills were, and we're using the descriptions in order to show that you have the skills and abilities that they need. Transferable skills do matter. So transferable skills are the skills that you gain from working in lots of different areas. These are kind of the skills that we say can't be taught. So every single job that you will ever do in your life, you will need to learn how that particular place wants you to do that job. So even like a brain surgeon, right? If a brain surgeon works somewhere, someone is going to have to tell that surgeon what kind of software they use or what kind of equipment they use, and they're going to have to show them how to use that equipment. The kinds of things that you can't teach people about is like how to relate well with others, or how to complete your jobs on time, or how to multitask. These are the transferable skills that employers look for because they can't be taught. And so being able to highlight those in positions is going to be really important too. Want to make sure that you focus on the positive, not what you can't do. And organization is key. So we're going to make sure that the strongest information that you have for the resume is going to be located towards the top. At the very top of your resume, if you are employment, you're going to have your profile or summary statement. So this is an area that provides focus. So it's going to talk about kind of what it is that you're looking for, your strengths, and it's going to lead to a successful outcome. Here you're also going to provide a summary of the skills and education that relate to that particular position. And we kind of liken this to grabbing the attention of the employer and summarizing your experience, kind of like a book jacket, if you will. In your profile summary section, you're going to think about all the qualifications that you have for that particular kind of position, and then you're going to narrow it down to about 5 to 7 statements that indicate what is important and unique about your specific experience. You do want to spend a lot of time with this. Like, this is the area that the employer reads first, and we want them to get really excited about what is to come. So even though the section on the resume is first, we generally write it last because it's supposed to be a summary. And there is no profile for graduate school resumes. So in graduate school, you're trying to show that you would be a good student, and the profile is more employment-based, where graduate school is going to be more education-based. Here's a sample profile that I have put together that any student can sort of tweak for their own devices. So seeking a position as a insert the job, where I can utilize my strengths and insert the skill to insert the outcome. So if we kind of fill in the blanks here, seeking a position as an accountant, where I can utilize my strong academic foundation of knowledge in accounting, coupled with solid attention to detail to perform timely and accurate services. So we're addressing every single part of that profile within that area. Then we're going to follow that up by bullets that summarize their key skills, experience, and education. So I've listed 4 bullets here that would be particularly geared towards accounting. But when you're developing these bullets under your profile, you're going to start to think about, like, what sort of classes have I taken that would be helpful for me in this kind of career? Is there any kind of software or experience that I know, software or equipment that I know how to use that would be helpful? And then what are some of the personal characteristics that I have that are going to be particularly helpful for a position within this area? And again, this should sort of serve as a summary. So, like, after you look through this, when we look at this person's resume, we should be able to see that they have successfully balanced their academics, their athletics, and other campus and community obligations. We should be able to see that they've had experience where they've worked with customers to have that strong customer service experience. Next section on the resume is going to be your education. And if you're doing a graduate school resume, education is going to be at the top. But here we're going to list the name of the school, the city, the state, the dates that you attended, or your estimated graduation date, if it's current. You can include other schools that you transferred from, but you don't have to. And in most cases, I would encourage you to only include that information if it's going to be helpful in some way. So if you did a job or you took a class when you were at that school that you found to be particularly helpful, then you might list the school so it makes sense that you would have had that experience. But otherwise, all the classes that you would have taken from here will transfer there, so you don't need to list that from a space perspective. We are almost never going to include high school. So unless you're a first or second year student, or unless you have some extraordinary kind of experience or award or anything like that, we're not going to go back that far. In employment, when we start to talk about like 3 to 4 years, that was a long time ago. So if you did something 3 to 4 years ago, the hope is that you would have done better things more recently than things that would have been that far away. If you are a first-year student, though, probably you're not going to have a whole lot of things to talk about in an employment resume, so then you can include your high school in the participation that you did while you were there. If you don't have any related experience in your field of study, then I do also recommend under the education section, you add related courses with classes that you've taken. So this provides the employer with the knowledge that you would have a foundational knowledge of these areas, even though you don't have any professional experience. Next section for everyone, if you have it, is going to be your related experience section. And then the work history section, other work history section is set up similar to this, so we talk about it at the same time. But if you have related experience, when you talk about your job descriptions, we're going to talk about those very specifically. So we're going to say, these are the specific tasks that I did. And we're going to go past just describing those. Like, why did you do those kinds of things? Like, why was that important? Did that connect to any kind of goals or initiatives in the department? What were the results of what you did? Are you able to quantify that? Did you use any specific equipment or processes? Even if the equipment or processes or software is different from the job that you're applying for, being able to say that you learned a software on the job indicates that you would be able to learn about other software. So it's important. It's important for you to connect the dots for the employer to see your value for this kind of position. Now, when you're talking about other work history, we're not going to talk specifically about your tasks. We're going to talk about what you gained from that position and what you learned. So we're really going to focus on those transferable skills, things like communication skills and time management and working effectively under pressure, attention to detail, all those kinds of things. We're going to focus on those aspects versus the specific tasks. When we talk about elevating your descriptions, this gives you a really good idea of how just a couple of words can really impact what you're saying to an employer and really help you focus some attention on what you've done. So right here, the first statement says implemented a new filing system. So implemented is a good, strong action verb. you're saying what you did there, this is a decent bullet. But if you look at each of the bullets, adding just a couple of words each time, we end up with the strongest bullet, which is implemented a new system utilizing Excel, which resulted in a 20% increase in successful claims. So just by kind of thinking a little bit more specifically and focusing your attention on different kinds of things, we make this a much stronger bullet. So I really want to challenge you to think about data. How can you add numbers, percentages, or accomplishment-based goals to your resume? A lot of times it's not as easy to just say, I'm going to do that by myself. You need to talk with people. You need to maybe talk with your former employer, talk with some of your coworkers, and figure out what are some of the data that you might be able to use. So for example, here on campus, if you work in the admissions office, could you talk about the goals that were in the admissions office? If you work in telethon, could you talk about those goals? If you worked in security, are there numbers that you could talk about in the sense of how many times they get called and everything like that? So just really thinking about how can you use numbers, percentages, or accomplishment-based goals to help add focus to your resume. Next section, if you have it, is going to be honors, activities, leadership. This can be labeled in whatever way you want it to be labeled. That makes the most sense for you. Here, you're going to include what is pertinent either to the kind of job that you're interested in or developing yourself as someone who has been involved on campus. So most employers think if you have been involved when you are at campus, then the likelihood is you will be involved when you are at work, which is something that they look for. We're only going to include specific information about your participation if it was an elected position, if that activity is very specifically related to your field of study, or if there's some achievement-based goals that we can call upon for that. Otherwise, we're just going to list that you were maybe a part of that group so that they can see that you participated in that. I always recommend that every student have a references page. Most often that's going to be an additional page. So if you have a one-page resume, your references would go on the next page. You're going to need to primarily have professional references, anywhere between 3 to 5 of those. Professional references are those that are people that you know professionally. So it's going to be like faculty, advisors, former employers, coworkers, coaches, all could count for professional references. You're going to contact your references ahead of time, and you're going to ask them if they would be willing to be your reference instead of telling them. You really only want to be using people for references who are really jazzed about being a reference for you. But you do also kind of determine what kind of role you want them to play. So if you're primarily using faculty references, maybe you have 2 faculty references, you want to make sure that those faculty aren't going to say the exact same thing about you. We want them to kind of diversify their experiences. So maybe one would talk about how you are in class as a student, and maybe the other would talk about how you are as an advisee or how you are as a member of some group or club. And then you do want to provide a copy of your resume to your references so that they can better speak on your behalf. This is a sample of what a references might look like. Their name and their relationship to you if it's not clear. So that could be, you know, political science instructor, it could be former employer, it could be current supervisor. Then you're going to list their employer, the city, state, the zip, their phone number, and their email if all those things are available to you, and they check them regularly. All right, so that is the information that we have on elevating your resume to the next level. If you ever have any questions, we would encourage you to schedule an appointment with Career Services through Handshake. Or you also can email your resume to Career Services, and we'll take a look at it. If there's a lot of work that needs to be done, we'll probably call you and ask you to schedule an appointment. But if it's just a quick review, we're happy to do those via email as well. Thanks, guys.